Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever time of night or day it is, wherever you may be, whomever may have stumbled upon this video. So, my voice is better tonight. I have managed to get some local honey, which is supposed to immunize me to the pollen, and it seems to be doing a good job. There's still a little bit of issue, but anyway, my last video went on really far too long. I chased a few rabbits, and the issues with my allergies slowed me down a bit. So I was only covering the first topic of the second episode of the Late Night Echo Chamber channel. So tonight, in this video, I intend to cover the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh topics which they discussed, which will basically finish off their topics. There are a few I'm not going to address. So, the topics of their video, which I'm responding to here tonight, are the budget, Trump's wall, Trump's favorability, military spending, National Public Radio and Public Broadcasting Service funding, the Dodd-Frank proposed repeal, and Ryancare or Trump Care or Republican health care, whatever you want to call that. So I'm going to include again a link to the video to which I'm responding and a link to their channel, as well as a link to my previous video wherein I covered their first topic, which was identity politics. I'm also including in the description of this video some links concerning healthcare, because that is a topic that was discussed in their video, and I'm including a link to a blog post I did wherein I collected a lot of links to refute some of the smears that were directed against Dr. Jill Stein. So let me get right into it. I'm not going to say much about the budget because it was kind of broken up into several different topics, and most of them go into some of the other topics that will be discussed. So what I will say about the budget, the thing that has been proposed and I suppose been passed in the House, I'm not sure if it has passed in the Senate yet or not, is it was better than it could have been. But a cut is still a cut, and most of the things which are being proposed to be cut probably shouldn't be cut at all. Moving on into Trump's wall. Now, there was a statement that Trump has threatened basically to shut down the government later this year if he doesn't get it funded, because it wasn't going to be funded in the present proposed budget. The wall itself is a ridiculous idea. And threatening to shut down the government over it is even more ridiculous. Historically, walls have been built to keep people in rather than to keep other people out. And there have, of course, been exceptions, but those were primarily in the distant past. The Great Wall of China, for example, to keep the Mongols out, which didn't really work very well. The two walls built across Britain by the Romans to keep the Picts and the Scots out, which also didn't really work very well. But in modern history, we've seen things like the Berlin Wall, to take an example with which most people are familiar, especially people of my own generation. Now, that may have served a secondary purpose of keeping Westerners out, although the East German government probably didn't turn away many tourists. They did have some concerns with espionage and subversion. However, its primary purpose was always to keep the people in East Berlin in East Berlin. Add to that the fact that part of the border, which the U.S. shares with Mexico, runs along the Rio Grande, and issues of construction arise. You can't effectively build a wall in the middle of a river, after all. And on top of that, what happened to the claim that the wall which Trump spoke of was a metaphor, and now it's a literal wall again, or a literal wall for the first time? I don't know. But I recall that, I don't know if it was immediately prior to or immediately after the election in November, there was a lot of claim that the wall was never intended as a literal wall, but it was merely a metaphor for a stronger border patrol and so forth. So I don't know what that's about. But this criticism of the wall having been offered, I will, however, grant that border security ought to be tighter. At the same time, I also agree that we need to reform our immigration laws. So moving on then to Trump's popularity, I agree, Porcelain is right that the establishment Republicans don't like Trump any more than the establishment Democrats. She's also right in pointing out that many Republicans don't see him as a real Republican, and with good reason, because it hasn't been that long ago that Trump was a Democrat and even donated to Hillary's campaign in the past. Of course, people can change their perspectives and party affiliations or memberships and can do so sincerely. I myself have done so. I started out my adult life as a Republican. I even insisted on my registration including the word Republican in this state, which did not at the time have party registration and still does not. Then I gravitated towards the Democrats, although I never joined the party and didn't go down to the courthouse to have Republican replaced with Democrat. Then I became more or less green and then independent. I even flirted with the Libertarian Party for a while, but I never became a member of that party. And then more or less Democrat, but with serious reservations. And now I am again green to the point that I'm a member of my state's Green Party. I'm in one of the Green Party of the U.S. caucuses. I am on or will be on one of the national GPUS working groups once we get those off the ground. Trump's conversion, however, has been viewed as dubious by some, including some who are not Republicans. Riley is right to question why we need to spend more money on the military. We were already devoting over half of discretionary spending to the military, and the amount exceeds any other nation's spending on the military significantly. That said, I do think that military personnel deserve better pay than they've been getting, and I'm absolutely sure that veterans deserve better than they've been getting. Porcelain makes a good point on this as well. While we may no longer be spending insane amounts on hammers and toilet seats for the military, there is still a lot of waste in military spending. It could be managed more efficiently. For example, Kevin gave the example of the M1 Abrams tank plant being kept open for political reasons rather than for any actual military need. Regarding PBS and NPR funding, Porcelain again, very apt. However, the fact that much funding of these services has increasingly come from private corporations and assorted foundations may have quite a lot to do with that one-sided perspective that we've seen. The appropriate response to this, as I think you suggested, is not to cut public funding, but to restore what has already been cut and increase public funding to even higher levels. Moving on then to Dodd-Frank and the suggestion that it should be repealed. Repealing Dodd-Frank would only help the average person if it were replaced with a reinstatement of Glass-Steagall or something even better. Porcelain is on the money here. They absolutely did not learn their lesson in the banking industry, but instead they got bailed out. There were no consequences. They did not learn a lesson. Glass-Steagall was a response to the same risky lending and investment in bubble economies, which were a part of the 1920s policies under Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover, which together with the other policies of that decade were major contributors to the Great Depression. All of the safety measures, such as Glass-Steagall, which were enacted following the election of FDR, were intended to prevent another economic collapse of that magnitude, and they have been being slowly undone, and the few which remain are the only reason we have not already had another collapse of that magnitude, because the same behavior has been being repeated by corporations and banks again. And if this repeal of Dodd-Frank be not replaced by something stronger, then I have to ask, how much longer will it be before the same mindset which dominated the government and the private sector in the 1920s demands that the FDIC itself be done away with as well? That is, after all, where they want to go. And right again, porcelain corporations have demonstrated repeatedly throughout history that they cannot be trusted to regulate themselves. Okay, so moving on to this Republican health care bill, which was recently passed in the U.S. House of Representatives, which some are calling Trump Care and some are calling Ryancare, and some have other names for, some of which are not very, not very polite, and I probably would agree with those not very polite names. But I'm primarily going to respond to this topic with some links in the description for this video, because most of what I could say has already been said in great detail by myself and others. I would, however, like to respond to some of Porcelain's concerns. So, as was pointed out, and as you know, this is how even private insurance companies work, and that is, they operate as a pool of money collected from all persons who are covered under their policies. And then if and when someone with such coverage requires medical attention or medication, durable medical equipment, a checkup, a test, whatever, they or their doctor's office files a claim, and if the claim is filed in accord with whatever idiosyncratic requirements the given insurance company has established, and every one of them has a different, a different system. And then if the company approves the claim, then some of the money in the pool is taken to cover those expenses, or at least some of the expenses. It could be the case that someone insured by that company never gets sick, never needs an operation, never needs any medication or durable medical equipment, and so on, and only has to go in for checkups every so often, and so is paying far more than he or she actually needs to pay, while someone else pays the same amount but has a host of medical issues and injuries and so on. And in most cases, neither of these outcomes can be even vaguely predicted, which is why the whole scheme is called insurance. It's a just-in-case provision. And it has always been that the pool of money uses money from those who are healthier to cover those who are less healthy. But in the past, before the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, which some call Obamacare and others call Romneycare, anyone with pre-existing condition could be denied coverage for that condition, at least temporarily. And it was also the case that a person who had a large number of health issues, or who was diagnosed with a chronic or debilitating disease, would see his or her premium increased to the point that it became out of the bounds of possibility for that person to continue to remain covered. I know this latter from personal experience, although my outcome was nowhere near as dire or as expensive as the insurance company I used to have expected it to be. And the condition which I have is now in remission and has been for almost 20 years. However, along the way, other complications have developed as a result of medications and surgeries I have had, which are, however, by no means as expensive as my former insurance company expected them to be. The point, however, is that those who are already healthy do cover those who are less so, even with a single even within a single private insurance company, and that's not a new phenomenon. The same practice applies to auto insurance, of course. You may be a super driver, you may never have any accidents, you may observe all the rules of the road, you may never get a ticket, and so on, while someone else insured by the same company may be much less responsible or competent behind the wheel. And yet still you pay the same premium, basically. Now, of course, the more tickets someone gets, the more accidents they have and so forth, the higher their premium is raised. The only difference which would occur if the state were to take over healthcare insurance entirely would be that the pool would be larger, and so would the number of people paying in and being covered. which is, of course, why the pool would be larger. So, excuse me, I'm going to have to take a sip anyway of my soda. So, I don't think there's any real justifiable reason in terms of logic to feel selfish about your own situation. I understand the emotional reasons behind it, but I don't think there's a logical or rational reason for it, because that is theoretically the purpose of insurance in the first place, to cover, to build a pool from which those who have, an accident, break a bone, get stabbed, or come down with some illness or whatever, will be covered. And the people who don't are going to be paying in, and that money is going to be used to cover people who do. That's the way it is supposed to work, theoretically. Now, I say theoretically because in actual fact, private insurance companies, the purpose of any private company, is to make money for the executives and owners and stockholders, and that's true of private healthcare insurance companies too, which is one of the reasons they need to go and be replaced by insurance which is not about profit. I mean, it's not really a good idea to take healthcare advice from someone who makes a profit when your healthcare is not provided for. I don't think that these companies have any business in healthcare insurance at all. I think they need to be replaced with nationally improved and expanded Medicare for all, as you will see in the links I've provided in the description above or below, or whatever, I don't know. Okay, so another thing you mentioned was staying in the ER for a few hours at a cost of $5,000. And this is another issue, and that is namely that healthcare prices are in no way standardized. You may go to Hospital A and be charged $50,000 for procedure and care, which you could get at Hospital B for less than half that. Dental work is one of the prime examples that people talk about. If you need dental implants, for example, or dentures, then you also need to shop around for the best prices because they vary widely. On top of that, medications are priced differently for individuals and hospitals. So with hospitals being charged more, prior to the Affordable Care Act, a person without insurance would pay far less for, say, omeprazole than his or her insurance company would be charged for the exact same prescription if he or she were insured. That's still the case, unfortunately, because negotiating with pharmaceutical companies is not easy, and in relation to government health care, it cannot legally be done at all at the moment. So, So please take a look at the links I've provided in the video description for what I believe would be an actual improvement on the Affordable Care Act, and I'm not alone. Healthcare professionals and business leaders tend to agree, with the exception of private insurance companies, of course. I'm going to skip the stuff about the milk tariff and NAFTA and so forth because I know nothing about this. I haven't even heard about it. So coming back to Trump's favorability, Man, Kevin, Jewel was a much better candidate. I'm sorry, she was. And I'm going to include another link in the description here to dispel some of the smears against her, which were promoted by Hillary's campaign and supporters. I mean, all this crap about her being an anti-vaxxer or pandering to anti-vaccination people or being somehow anti-scientific. The woman is a doctor, a medical doctor. She got her training at Harvard University, Harvard Medical School. And she even was a teacher, a professor there for a while. So, I mean, Harvard may not be what it once was, but it's still one of the better schools in the United States. And I don't think they would have allowed her to teach there if she were some kind of anti-scientific kook. But I have collected a number of links. I mean, it's one of the longest blog posts I ever did. Um, which talk about, well, there are some examples of videos she herself did, videos in which she was interviewed, questions were put to her directly, she answers them, and those alone should dispel all the anti-vaxxer stuff. I also wrote a bit about, her perspective on it and the fact that her real concern is with the FDA and the fact that it is beholden to lobbyists and so may not be as trustworthy as we would like for it to be, and so forth. And there are other things that were discussed there. Her view on genetically modified foods and the claim, which you often see bandied about, that there is some kind of scientific consensus on the safety of GMOs. There is not. There may be a large majority, but there is still not a consensus. And I've included links to peer-reviewed papers in various journals that point out that what she's talking about, the precautionary principle, is an actual principle in medicine, and we need to, be sure before we start, digging in and chomping on that stuff. The thing about Wi-Fi that she had been accused of talking about, there are some examples of other people who have concerns and a more recent study which says, hey, there may be something to this after all. It's been supposedly debunked for a while, but more recent studies are saying, well, maybe we were a little too hasty in saying we had debunked that. And, Dr. Stein is a doctor, and she keeps up with the latest studies and findings in the field. So, I mean, she's probably a little more aware of what is what than most of us lay people. As for Trump's continued favorability, I am a bit torn. He's done a few good things, particularly killing off the TPP. But he's also done some rather abysmal things, such as overturning Title IX protections for transsexual students, and of course the attack on Syria. So, I mean, it's a mixed bag at this point. I didn't vote for him, and I think from my previous comments it's obvious that I voted for Dr. Stein, and I did. And during the primaries, I supported Senator Sanders. But anyway, as far as Trump, I don't know, I mean, I certainly, I won't say that he's better than Hillary, but I'll say that he's not as bad as Hillary. I know that might sound like it's the same thing, and it may be, but I just don't want to say he's better than her. I certainly would say she's worse than he. But anyway, so I'm not going to respond to the topic of the French election, as I know a little bit about it, but I didn't really follow it closely enough to say much. I will say that I would have probably preferred Mélenchon, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but I probably would have preferred him over Le Pen or Macron. And I do not support the European Union because it is by no means democratic. I am actually in favor of Brexit, and I would like to see the EU basically crumble or be dismantled or whatever, because it's basically a lot of unelected bureaucrats who are subverting national sovereignty. I'm also not going to address the sex robot topic, nor the offshoots of that into the men's rights activists and feminism. I've not paid sufficient attention to MRAs to have an informed opinion. I know a little bit about it, but I would need to know a great deal more before I could form my own opinion and have it be an informed one. So I'm just not going to touch that at all. As for feminism, I have a number of opinions and comments to make, but I'm going to reserve my comments on feminism for another time. So that's the full range of topics, and those are my responses to them. I have been asked to come on the next live stream of Late Night Echo Chamber, which will be this coming Monday, the 15th of March, and that will be 8 p.m. U.S. Eastern, 7 p.m. U.S. Central, 6 p.m. U.S. Mountain, 5 p.m. U.S. Pacific, and so on. I have accepted the invitation, so hopefully those few people who have found my channel and or this present video will tune in at that time to see what topics we discuss and what we will say about them, possibly have some comments or questions in the live chat. So then, until later, be well.